So then in Judges, so yesterday we saw Gideon, God visiting Gideon, and so the angel of Yahweh, who is closely tied to Yahweh, and this is probably a pre-incarnate Christ, as I'm pretty sure at least half, if not like majority of scholars and people hold to this being pre-incarnate Christ coming in human form and meeting with Gideon, receiving sacrifice. So there are many elements, many things about the angel of Yahweh where he's just so closely associated with God himself that you just have to conclude he has to be something like pre-incarnate Christ. So the language is before the incarnation, before John 1:14 happened, God became a man. That Christ, he came in human form. That's why it's called pre-incarnate Christ. But we saw the apostasy of Israel, and then God using Gideon, and then at the end of chapter 6, the sign of the fleece. Then, now in chapter 7, so Michael, who seems to like battle scenes, maybe he'll like it, but it won't be as much of a battle. But so Judges 7, then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the well of Harod, so that the camp of the Midianites was on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. So remember, God said that I'm going to deliver you, I'm going to deliver Israel through you, that whole thing yesterday. And so it's going on now, 7:2. And Yahweh said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, my own hand has saved me. So this is exactly what I was saying yesterday. Remember what I said about how God uses the lowly and people that seem unqualified to the world standards. By the way, it's the world standards, not God's standard, because, for example, God does have qualifications for pastors or things like that. Of course, there has to be certain qualifications, but in the world's perspective, the natural perspective of being smart, intelligent, strong, that kind of stuff, that people usually go by, with that kind of thing, God, large armies, things like that, God uses people that seem so weak and nothing, because if they're strong, mighty, smart, whatever, then they would get the glory when they succeed, when they gain victory, when they win the battle. Hey, we won because we're a powerful army. We won because, hey, we have way more number of army and better weapons and this and that than that country. So of course, the credit goes to their strength, their this, that, their pros. And so you see this verse, I have it like underlined, really, really underlined, like hard, because this is such a huge passage. So basically, the army is too huge, but if you actually know the number, later on we'll see that the army was, so if you look at verse 3, now therefore proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and afraid among the soldiers, let him turn and depart at once from Mount Gilead. And 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained. Okay, we got some math here. 22,000 returned, and then 10,000 remained. So that means, there's 32,000. So there were 32,000, but if you look at the enemy's army, in chapter 8, verse 10, well, if you look at chapter 7, verse 12, at the end of 7:12, it says that their camels were without number, let me back up a little bit. So just 7:12 itself, it says, now the Midianites and Amalekites, all the people of the east, were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number, as the sand by the seashore in multitude. So it says the enemy's army, they're like, teamed up. They're as numerous as locusts. But the actual number, you find out in chapter 8, verse 10, where it was 135,000. So this was 32,000 versus 135,000. So when you're on the side that has 32,000, you feel kind of doomed because you have way less, right? But in this situation, God is saying there's too many people. The 32,000 side, there's too many people, so I need to reduce the number. Because if you end up winning, even in this kind of situation, they're going to claim glory for itself. The chapter 7, verse 2. Israel, if they win, they're going to claim, oh, it's because we were powerful, we had a lot of people. And so God is saying, we need to reduce the number. And so, 7:3, proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and afraid, let him turn and depart at once, basically just go home. And so, out of the 32,000, 22,000 go home. And then 10,000 remained. So now it's a situation where it's 10,000 versus 135,000. That doesn't look good. But verse 4, what is said? But Yahweh said to Gideon, the people are still too many. What? The people are still too many. Bring them down to the water and I will test them for you there. And then, depending on how they drink water, verse 5, so Gideon, he brought the people down to the water, and Yahweh said to Gideon, everyone who laps from the water with his tongue as a dog laps, so if they drink water like a dog, kind of like that, he shall set apart by himself. Likewise, everyone who gets down on his knees to drink. And the number of the people who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men, and all the rest of the people got down on their knees to drink water. So it's kind of hard. I guess the Hebrew is kind of hard exactly what it's saying, but it seems like out of the 10,000 people that remained, most of them, I guess, drank like how people normally drink, but 300 people, they drank in a kind of a unusual, special, different way. And God is saying, those 300 people that drank water in kind of a stranger way, I'm going to deliver Israel by them. Verse 7. Then Yahweh said to Gideon, by the 300 men who lapped, I will save you and deliver the Midianites into your hand. So not only is the number a bit ridiculous, 300 versus 135,000, but even the 300, they seem a little, how you drink water is not as whatever, but it seems like they drink water like a dog or something. So by these 300, I'm going to deliver you. Because if, Michael here, I'm thinking he has looked into war and stuff like that, and maybe history and how wars happen and how they go on, strategies, etc. But if you have 300 versus 135,000, most likely the 135,000 is going to win. Obviously it's a no-brainer. But if the 300 win, how would people respond to that? Well, it's going to be, there must have been something special that happened. It must have been some special situation. They will have to assume there's some special situation. In a normal situation, obviously you can't have 300 winning 135,000. But that's exactly how God gets glory for himself. God used an 80-year-old man, Moses, some grandpa looking out in the desert for 40 years man, to stand against Pharaoh, the most powerful nation at that time, standing before the king and saying, you need to let my people go. And then the whole Egypt got destroyed throughout the time period of about a year or so. And the people got delivered, saved out. So all throughout the Bible, God tends to do things like this. In the New Testament, these fishermen and disciples of Jesus that looked like ridiculous people, unqualified people, they turned the world upside down. Charles Spurgeon, a well-known preacher, pastor in 1800s. He was, in a way, he was an uneducated, untrained man. He never went to seminary. But if you ask pastors, everyone knows about Charles Spurgeon as one of the greatest preachers that ever lived. So very often God uses people in situations where it's very, very unlikely that they're going to succeed, whatever, so that the credit goes to him. God is glorified. Hallelujah. So we got this 300 now, and so verse 9. It happened on the same night that Yahweh said to Gideon, "Arise, go down against the camp, go down against the other side's camp," or maybe not, maybe it's his own camp, "for I have delivered it into your hand." So God speaks in this kind of way. The battle hasn't even happened yet, but he like uses this past tense kind of a thing. I know in Hebrew it's not the way we have it with the tense. I know it's different. But it must be this kind of a thing where God, because God often does this, where he speaks as though it already happened, even though it hasn't yet, because it's so certain it's going to happen. Verse 10, "But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah your servant, and you shall hear what they say, the enemy side, and afterward your hand shall be strengthened to go down against the camp." So here you see God's mercy, his compassion, his kindness, that Gideon, he knows that Gideon is probably a bit scared because, you got 300 people, like puny little group, and then the other side is 135,000. That's kind of a lot. Most human beings never even see that kind of number in their life, army. So God knows he's scared, and so, hey, Gideon, if you're scared, do this. Go to the camp on the other side. So he goes down with Purah, his servant, to the outpost of the armed men who were in the camp. Now the Midianites and Amalekites and all the people of the east were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number, as the sand by the seashore in multitude. And when Gideon had come, there was a man telling a dream to his companion. So Gideon and his servant is secretly, of course, quietly going over to listen. And this is where God's sovereignty comes in. Gideon ends up going at the perfect location, at the perfect timing in God's sovereignty, and he hears this. This enemy's side soldier says to his companion, "I had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. It came to a tent and struck it so that it fell and overturned, and the tent collapsed." So think about this. He wouldn't be lying, right? He really had a dream the previous night, or sometimes army, they can sleep at different times. But he had a dream, and he had this kind of dream that God pretty much gave him. And he's sharing it to his companion of basically this negative thing happening to their side. And verse 14, his companion answered and said, "This is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. Into his hand God has delivered Midian and the whole camp." So Gideon, he's hearing this. And so verse 15, so it was, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, the dream and the interpretation, that he worshipped. Guys, this is kind of those situations where you have to just fall down and worship. I hope we have situations in our lives like this where there are certain moments, certain incidents where you just praise God, you just worship him. You may not necessarily fall on the ground, but those moments where God answered a prayer, those moments where God did this or that, where he revealed something or something, and in that moment you just have to just worship God. I hope you have those times, the most amazing times. So this is that kind of moment. In God's sovereignty, Gideon ends up going at night to to the enemy's army side quietly, and he ends up hearing this particular soldier sharing this dream to his companion, and then hearing the interpretation. So you also see the sovereignty of God here. And so he worships, and then he returned to the camp of Israel. So now he's absolutely just emboldened. Think about it. He was probably quite terrified, but with hearing this, God uses this to totally get him like pumped up, kind of like just emboldened. So he goes back to the camp. He returned, and then he said, "Arise, for Yahweh has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand." So now he's just bold, he's standing firm. He's telling the camp with boldness, our God Yahweh, he delivered their camp into our hand, into your hand. 16. Then he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put a trumpet into every man's hand with empty pitchers and torches inside the pitchers, and said to them, "Look at me and do likewise. Watch, and when I come to the edge of the camp, you shall do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you also blow the trumpets on every side of the whole camp, and say, 'For Yahweh and for Gideon.'" They're supposed to yell that out. So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just as they had posted the watch. And they blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers that were in their hands. Then the 300 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers. And they held the torches in their left hand and the trumpets in their right hands for blowing. And they cried, "The sword for Yahweh and for Gideon." And every man stood in his place all around the camp. And the whole army ran and cried out and fled. Then the 300 blew the trumpets. Yahweh set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp, and the army fled to Beth Acacia toward Zererah, and as far as the border of Abel Meholah by Tabah. Okay, let's put ourselves in this context of warfare, battlefield. The enemy's army, in any war zone, like you have, of course, during this time, there are no guns or anything, but you have arrows, you have swords, you have those kinds of things, shields, those kinds of things. You not only have 300 men here, but they don't seem to even be carrying weapons. I mean, they might have some weapon on the side, but maybe they do, because later on there's a little more battle. But their main thing is something that would be considered kind of crazy and worthless. They have pitchers that they're about to smash, and they have trumpets. Now, there were people that carry trumpets to give signals and stuff, but all these people, they have trumpets and these pitchers. That's like the main kind of weapon that they have. So this whole situation looked totally ridiculous and crazy. Not only do you have 300, but the 300 are carrying these junky things that look dumb, that look worthless. And so, with such worthless things that look worthless, God ends up using those things, and the sound, the smashing of the pitchers, and then the blowing of the trumpets, it terrified the enemy's army, and the whole army ran and cried out, and they fled. And it says, verse 22, that basically God set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp, so they end up destroying each other. And see, as the Bible indicates, it teaches in many places, when you're united, it's just all over the Bible, like Old Testament, New Testament, Tower of Babel, where they're all, of one language, they're all united. God himself says nothing will be impossible for them. Teaches in the New Testament for the church to make sure you're of one mind, one spirit, united, not divided. God got them to fight against each other and destroy each other. And this is often what happens when God's people, or whoever, any group, any company, when it starts having issues within the family, within the company, within any organization, any church, You may know of churches that have fallen apart. Do you know why that happens often? Probably the number one cause. You start fighting against each other. It gets destroyed. But yeah, God here, he sets every man's sword against his companion, and that's how the 300 end up defeating the 135,000, because God in his sovereignty, we don't know exactly how, but whether it's with a scary noise and things like that, they just end up panicking and or whatever else it is. They end up killing each other, and so the army is destroyed. And so God gives victory in that kind of way. And due to the time and stuff, we're pretty behind, and so that's just the important part, that God delivers that kind of way. And then we can go to towards the end of Gideon's life. So if you look at 8:22, then the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Rule over us, both you and your son and your grandson also, for you have delivered us from the hand of Midian." But Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. Yahweh shall rule over you." So when you read that, you know, oh man, that's wonderful. Gideon had things right. But then you keep reading. Then Gideon said to them, "I would like to make a request of you, that each of you would give me the earrings from his plunder." For they had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. So they answered, "We will gladly give them." And they spread out a garment, and each man threw into it the earrings from his plunder. Now the weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides the crescent ornaments, pendants, purple robes, which were on the kings of Midian, and besides the chains that were around their camels' necks. So they were pretty wealthy, you can see that. 27, then Gideon made it into an ephod. It's kind of a garment clothing kind of thing, but kind of special clothing. Made it into an ephod and set it up in his city, Ophrah, and Israel played the harlot with it there. It became a snare to Gideon and to his house. So, as I said, when you know the book of Judges, you know that it was a very strange and bad time. And many times you see a real mixture of good and bad. So you remember Gideon's dad, on the one hand, he had an altar for Baal, but on the other hand, he kind of stands up for God. When the people in the town were about to kill Gideon, the dad is like, let Baal stand up for himself. Let Baal plead for himself if he's really like God. So there's this mixture of kind of loyalty to God Yahweh, but then being involved in pagan idolatry, paganized. You see the same kind of thing here. On the one hand, Gideon's like, no, I'm not going to rule over you. My sons are not. Yahweh God, he's going to rule over you. But then he wants this ephod that he makes, and he set it up. Verse 27. He collects gold. He makes this image kind of thing with it. He sets it up in the city. And then Israel ends up, because Israel, probably not the whole nation, but maybe the whole nation. Actually, it does say all Israel played the harlot with it there. So it probably started with that city, but this idolizing of this piece of clothing, because that's the kind of practice that was all over the place. Idolatry. You set up an image. Even today, there are Buddhists and there are Hindus that set up a statue, set up an image, and they bow down before it. Well, that goes way back. So, yeah, we see this with Gideon. Kind of strange. He ends up doing that. And then, thus Midian was subdued before the sons of Israel, so that they lifted their heads no more. And the country was quiet for 40 years in the days of Gideon. So, I guess just ending chapter 8, then Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, this is Gideon, went and dwelt in his own house. Gideon had 70 sons who were his own offspring, for he had many wives. So you can also see this. Where are you supposed to notice when you hear that he had 70 sons because he had many wives? Paganization, culture around, just like fornication stuff going on around us, 21st century. Boyfriend, girlfriend having sex normalized. And professing Christians are influenced, and so professing Christians do the same kind of thing many times. His surrounding is where they have many, many wives, and so Gideon, he just follows that practice that surround him. We notice this to be strange and off, but when you're in such a context, you're so influenced. So he had many wives, 70 sons, and his concubine, 31, verse 31, and his concubine who was in Shechem. So he also had a concubine, so kind of somebody that you have for sex, basically, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, whose name he called Abimelech. Gideon, the son of Joash, died at a good old age. So Gideon finally dies, and he was buried in the tomb of Joash's father in Ophrah of the Zebulunites. So it was as soon as Gideon was dead that the sons of Israel again played the harlot with the Baals and made Baal bury their God. Thus the sons of Israel did not remember Yahweh their God, who had delivered them from the hands of all their enemies on every side, nor did they show kindness to the house of Jerubbaal Gideon in accordance with the good he had done for Israel. So when we read about this kind of thing, we notice it, recognize it to be strange and off. But when you are in the midst of that stuff going on as a normal thing, they're so desensitized, they're so influenced, they don't notice it. And that exact same thing applies to this time period, where there are all kinds of comical, ridiculous, insane things that go on around us, but people are blinded with all kinds of sexual immorality, perversion, gender stuff, all kinds of things. So that's Judges, and Luke 20:45. Then in the hearing of all the people, Jesus said to his disciples, "Beware of the scribes who desire to go around in long robes, love greetings in the marketplaces, the best seats in the synagogues, and the best places at feasts, who devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. These will receive greater condemnation." So Jesus often gave very stern, firm warnings. He wasn't afraid to give scary, firm warnings. So here, verse 45, in the hearing of everyone, he basically boldly said to his disciples, beware of the scribes. And scribes were, I'm pretty sure they were respected, kind of like Pharisees. Maybe not as much, but he's pointing out some religious teachers who would have been respected. But he actually gives warning about them. Beware of them. And then what does he point out? Who desire to go around in long robes, because that kind of long robe, it had to do with kind of with how you look. You know how I think a good example you can use is like the Roman Catholic so-called church. I think some of us may have had exposure. I know one time when I was in a different state, I just peeked in because I've never really been to a Catholic church mass, and I just kind of peeked in just to. But you know how the way they dress, the priests I'm talking about, those people, based on how you dress. I mean, and this applies to all kinds of different things. Doctors, when they're wearing their clothing, their white, whatever you call it. Police officers, you might know somebody that's a police officer, but when they're just dressed casually versus when they're in their like suit, whatever, it's a totally different image. So with these scribes, when they're dressing in a certain way, it's like, oh, there's this reverence, and that's what they go after. That's what Jesus is pointing out. They desire to go around in long robes. They love greetings in the marketplaces. And this greeting was like the honorable, respecting, oh, rabbi, rabbi, that kind of greeting. You know how, like, if you're noticed, especially because you're respected and things like that, I mean, this can apply to, I guess, celebrities or different well-known people, all kinds of different realms, businessmen. You can be a celebrity, you can be a sports star. They go to places and people are like, oh, so-and-so, yay, I get to see so-and-so. That's exactly what this kind of thing is. Sometimes, people say, oh, guess what? I went to this location this one time, and I saw blah, blah, blah. I saw this sports star. I saw this celebrity. They make a big deal out of it. So that's the kind of thing it is. Greetings in the marketplaces. They're all exalted. Best seats in the synagogues. There are certain seats in the front, I'm quite sure, where it's for like those high people. And the best places at feasts. So all these things connected to me being exalted, me being recognized, exalted, praised, all that kind of stuff. But also 47, who devour widows' houses. So as I've said, widows were the most vulnerable, weak people, because they're usually older women who no longer have a husband, and so they're in the most difficult place. But as Jesus says, probably not all of them, but it seems like at least many of them, the scribes, they take advantage. They devour widows' houses and get some financial gain out of them. And sadly, you see this kind of thing go on with some pastors or ministers where they're found out to have stolen money from the church or whatever stuff. They did this kind of stuff, and for a pretense, make long prayers. For the sake of, what is this talking about? For a pretense, making long prayers. By them praying for a long time, they're esteemed. And I think this is, I don't think I see this much in American Christianity, but I'm pretty sure in other Christianities around the world, I'm sure there are at least, there's got to be plenty of individuals who, at a church gathering, church service, many churches have an individual that, pray for that week. And in order to look all godly, they make really long prayers. Now, long prayer itself is never bad, but what's the motivation? What's the purpose behind long prayer? It's them being all respected and exalted, kind of like, oh, so-and-so, they're so godly, they pray so well. And I know this for sure. In a lot of American, Korean Christianity, this is, I think, pretty common, where if you pray a certain way, like certain vocabs, maybe long prayer or something, they hear, oh man, he prayed so well, she prayed so well. So you like that. So Jesus is giving very serious, strong warnings about this kind of stuff. These things are pointed out, and it's just, you can just know inspiration when you see things like this. The inspiration of the Bible, Jesus' teachings. And Jesus says that these people, they will receive greater judgment. So it's a scary warning. And that implies judgment is not always all the same for people. Some people will receive more serious judgment for their sins, versus others less serious. And so that's that. And then 21:1, I think this is the last section, 21:1-4. And Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the treasury. And he saw also a certain poor widow putting in 2 mites. And he said, truly I say to you that this poor widow has put in more than everyone. For all these, everyone else, out of their abundance have put in offerings, but she, the widow, out of her poverty, put in all the livelihood that she had. Okay, this is such a significant passage regarding money issues. So they had this treasury kind of thing, kind of like an offering box, like we have in church gatherings, church buildings. This contribution box they had in the temple, it functions just like an offering box, like churches have. And this is that scene where Jesus is in the temple area, and there was other people, they're wealthy, and they put in a bunch of stuff, a large amount of money. So it'd be today, it's like, somebody giving like $100, $1,000, probably not even $100, but like hundreds of dollars or $1,000 or thousands of dollars or something like that. But then there's this poor widow putting in 2 mites. So when it comes to these mites, these 2 small copper coins, it was the smallest and least valuable coins in circulation in Palestine, worth 1/2 of quadrans. So it was 1/28 of denarius. Okay, so 1 denarius was a day's wage. Okay, let's try to, we have to get our math brains on. I mean, not really, but kind of. So 1 denarius is a day's wage, and you can consider that maybe like $100, even though a lot of people make a lot more than that. If you count a day's wage as $100, this amount was 6 minutes of working. So you know how there's like an hourly wage? This amount of money was like a 6 minutes of work wage. So basically, it's a puny little amount. So how much would that be? 6 minutes of working. You know, if you made, you know, $10 or $20, if you made $10, $20 an hour, 6 minutes is a tenth. So it's like making $1 or $2. So this poor widow put in like $1 or $2. And what's amazing is Jesus says, with the rich putting in hundreds or thousands of dollars or more, and then this widow putting in $1, Jesus says this poor widow put in more than everyone else. What? How does that work? Explain that. Verse 4. For everyone else, out of their abundance they put in the offering, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything that she had, all the livelihood that she had. So there's a song that I mean, there are, you know, recommended song, Christian bands, Christian, you know, artists, and there's this one song, The Rich Young Ruler, I think, something like that, by Keith and Kristen Getty. You can check it out, and they're known as a very sound group that really know the Bible well, and the lyrics are really solid based on correct theology, Bible. And in the song, it says, basically, it's not about how much you give, but how much you keep for yourself that God is counting. Did you get that? It's not about how much you give that God is counting, but how much you keep for yourself that God is counting. And that's solid, based on this Bible passage. So many times, you know, celebrities, businessmen, whatever well-known person that has millions and millions of dollars, and they give, let's say, $1 million to whatever cause they support, whether they fund it for abortion or they give to children in Africa, which are good things. The latter, of course, the good thing. And the news media, they cover it. And many times, by the way, that's totally connected to what we read earlier. And people, for pretense, they do certain things in order to, you know, get some praise. They like secretly make sure, you know, certain media, they cover the fact that they gave $1 million or something. Many times, if somebody gives so much money, they're all praised. Oh, they're so whatever. But not only many times they do that for tax purposes, but their own name. But then even when you don't count that, for Christians, as it says right here, it's how much you keep for yourself that God is counting. So basically, let's say there's one Christian who makes $100,000 a year, and there's another Christian that makes $10,000 a year. The person that makes $100,000 a year, they might give way more. Let's say they make $100,000 and they gave $10,000 away to the brethren, which is a wonderful thing. I'm not at all saying that's negative. Not at all. That's wonderful. But the person that makes $10,000 and they gave, even though they need their basic needs and stuff, let's say they gave 1,000. The side that gave 1,000, only like 10% of what the other side gave. After all the basic needs are taken care of, removed, they don't have too much. But they use their money in that kind of way. That person is, it's much more pleasing to God than the other side that gave away 10,000. But all this extra stuff that they've had, they used it for themselves with all kinds of things that are not so necessary for Christians who are sojourners. Now, I know, this involves a lot of different things, like, some people decide that makes $100,000, other needs that they have, whatever. I know this involves a lot of different things, but you just get the point. I think you get the main point I'm saying. So, yeah, you can look up the song and check it out, but it's not so much how much you give, but how much you keep for yourself that God is counting. Now, there are, times where you need to go to the dentist or you need to take care of certain things and it costs a lot. That's not at all being discouraged, but just this has to do with how much like selfishness and self-centeredness is involved, how much usefulness of the money, like how well you use it biblically. Those kinds of things are involved. And I don't have time, for all of that, but I think you get the main point. As we saw before, stewardship is huge. We saw in Luke 16, we saw that chapter of Jesus saying, he who is faithful in little is also faithful in much. Stewardship, what you do with your money and your time. God has given you 24 hours a day for a certain amount of years, and God lets you have a certain amount of money. How biblically you use that time and money for Him. Any thoughts, questions? All right, well,
I think
go ahead.
I think the word you were looking for the story of the widow is these good intentions.
Yeah, there is good intention, but good intention is kind of involved too, because it is definitely possible that the rich, they gave with, kind of a selfish, that kind of, for the sake of their honor and stuff, that kind of way. But here in chapter 21, 1-4, in this context, Jesus doesn't go into that. He simply goes into just how the poor widow gave more. And he points out, for these, out of their abundance, they put in offerings. But then she out of her poverty. So the key focus is that part, as Jesus says. It's not about how much you give, but how much you keep for yourself and being a good steward. Yeah, what you spend your money on, as I say, when you consider, like, I teach on this. This is huge. When you consider marriage with somebody, one of the things that really reveals the person well a lot is how they spend their money. If I am thinking about marriage with somebody, I would want to know how this person spends their money and how they spend their time. Because that, as a matter of fact, I don't even have to meet somebody. I'm serious about this. I'm not exaggerating. Just from seeing how this person spends their money, if I got the info of that would eliminate, it would just reveal so much. It would eliminate so many kinds of people, because as you probably know, how a person spends their money is an absolute revelation of that person. It's huge. Well, unless we have anything else, we can pray and we're going. So, well, thank you for this time, getting to see in the Old and New Testament these things. Lord, with Gideon and how you got glory for yourself, your granting of victory and the way you did it. Lord God, how it is indeed about your glory, and how, Lord, just from studying these things, we can just, in a sense, the inspiration, we can see that, Lord. The way you work is just amazing, Lord. Your word itself is a revelation of you being the author, that you are behind it, every detail, all the teachings. May we learn, may we consider, may we be just impacted, influenced by your word, as it is life-changing. It really works in us, so let it so work in us, and get our mindset, our perspective, our viewpoint, our priorities shifted, changed, conformed. Work in us, I pray. So thank you for this time. Give glory for yourself. In Jesus' name. Amen.